guys, I am here at Katie Weiss of Katie and the Chorus. She has a podcast YouTube channel. Is it a YouTube channel?
I have a YouTube channel. I
YouTube.
have put some things on the YouTube channel.
She puts some things, but I primarily have binge listened to her on podcast version. I on Spotify to be specific, but whatever you listen to your podcast on. Anyway, she is like, okay, if I had to give you the elevator pitch of what Katie is like this puzzle piece put her together. I mean, she's like a massive macro, she sees the big picture of everything. And so she's a engineer, and then by nature, just like a natural puzzle engineer girl. And she's done some tech stuff, and then she had like crazy spiritual awakening, and now she channels a group of I guess like you just explain, it involves mountains, which I think is amazing. And it's just like, she's a fantastic, amazing, down to earth person. And like, okay, now that I messed that up a bit, how would you explain what it is that you do?
I loved it. It's spot on. That's great to hear other people interpret it, right? I mean, sometimes I'm like, I hear myself talk often enough. So no, I think that was spot on. So I was a tech strategist for a very long time. I worked in startups and then in a social sort of tech. I worked at Twitter for a little while. And then I moved into aerospace and then got very sick, had a very bumpy spiritual awakening in which I started to receive messages from a group of, I loosely classify them as loving beings, a group of loving beings that I started to call the Chorus. Now, there are a bunch of different personalities in the Chorus, and they have over the years stepped forward in different ways as, different topics are approached, and I've begun to recognize them more often and in different ways. But on the whole, what they share in common is a very loving perspective of humanity. Practically, I jokingly call them, they're our greatest fans. They think everything we have created here is amazing, right down to all the aspects of, challenge and struggle and the things that humans go through. And it's kind of through their way of seeing things and their logic for how they see things that way that I think, sort of causes you to expand into more perspectives, not necessarily a right perspective, not one that invalidates how we feel about being human sometimes, but one that sort of broadens you into all the different ways that you could see how we exist here.
That's beautiful. Okay, so let's dig into okay, so I know that in fact, it's almost kind of like the mineral kingdom has been involved in the Chorus. Like, we could put it that way. Now, do you think that is okay? Do you think that the Chorus at large particularly came to you by proximity of where you were? You used to live in the Rocky Mountains, like, do you kind of just feel like the Chorus in some kind of way is connected to your soul individually?
That's an interesting question. I think that so broadly, the Chorus, we'll start with how they define themselves. The Chorus defines themselves as being beyond the structures of belief. So they say that we resonated with a particular frequency or frequencies, depending on how you look at it. Those were the frequencies of disallowance, which created our experiences here of limitation, finiteness, and insufficiency. And so they say, well, we are, beyond the structure of beliefs because we don't resonate in the places that you resonate. And one of the first manifestations of your resonance is something that you call a belief. It's a structure. It's an energetic structure that creates. And so they said, all of us don't hold beliefs. That's not something that we exist within. And that's challenging for most of us as humans to even relate to, because it's hard for us to even envision what an existence might be like when you don't believe anything. So that classification loosely puts them what they call on the sidelines of our game. They like the game analogy for what we do here. And they say, hey, anybody who holds a belief by our view is playing the same game with you. You might all hold different beliefs, but you're fundamentally, by the belief definition, all playing in sort of the same realm.
Right. And we do hold beliefs. Like we believe that we have like, we roughly live to around 80-ish. We believe that we, like that the sun rises and sets at a certain time. Like we have all these like things that are that we've all agreed, like we've agreed on how we define time. We've agreed on how we define the calendar dates, and how like we've agreed on a lot of things that we don't even think about. They're just become second nature. But I don't really think animals have the agreement about time, or I mean, so it's I see that like we're playing like a game of limitation a lot. And it's even broader than not just like, oh, he's pretty, he's not, he's not like, not even like that kind of game. Like we're talking
Right.
about like boom. So
Yes.
what I always like about, like, they seem like the most laid back, like they're just kind of like Corona Schmona. Like whatever. It's like everything's just like not. It's like, oh, it's so nice that you are concerned about that. It's not concerning though, but it's nice that I'm happy that you're concerned. But so it's kind of like the ultimate pothead friend in some kind of way or something, but at the same time, what is super fascinating about the chorus is they give you their perspective on our history, on how the humans have come to be. And that's like crazy cool. So how did that start coming up?
So in the first season and the first book, so we've done one book, the second book is about to come out. The first book was the Book of Human Awakening, which was an introduction to an overview of the awakening process that they, say humanity at large is going through right now, which is expansion from a point of limitation. So they emphasize that you're not like ejecting off of it and, moving into higher realms. It's that you're keeping a foot in the game as you expand. And by doing so, you are able to expand through perspectives where you understand the validity of an existence of suffering and challenge, and how you can expand by way of that. But then also you can hold other perspectives that sort of are all equally valid. It's a way of expanding into the multiplicity of the universe, basically. So in that first introduction, they lay out 3 engines that they call of reality. These are, you could consider them to be like the driving forces, the enactors of a lot of this experience of limitation. And they are time, body, and distance. So these 3 things are actually pretty fluid concepts by their view. They are creations also by their view. We created the concept of time. The human version of linear time is what they cover in the second book and what we're talking about right now in the second season of the podcast. And they say that, there are many other ways to experience and to look at time, but they really take no issue with the linear version of it. They simply contrast in the book and in the second season different perspectives on time, and how, in some ways, the view of time as linear really served us here because we chose this experience of limitation, and linear time enacts a lot of that limitation. We're constantly running out of time is one way of looking at it. We're constantly sort of embodying the passage of time is another way of looking at it. But also they're pointing out that this concept of linear time shows up even more unconsciously in terms of, like, for example, our concept of an interruption. And they're like, that's totally yours. You guys had to create an experience of having sort of a mental projection of a plan and a passage of time in order to feel a sense of being interrupted. That's yours. So they start to point out how sort of time is infiltrated, you could say, in a lot of the ways that we experience our beliefs. And the more you start to see it, sort of the more the barriers, we might say, of time sort of start to soften. You can understand how it could be looked at that way, but it doesn't become any longer something that is the only thing that can define how you experience something. So when they started to talk about other versions of time, that's sort of when our history started to come up. And they said, you can put it on a line if you want to. And that's great. That is a great way to understand time, but there are other ways to connect to these different frequencies. And they point out that one way that many civilizations look at time is that it's really time place, meaning it's like a location, just like anything else. And so as you move between frequencies, you're experiencing different things, different places. Now, humans append that all to a singular line. And so when we start to experience something new, often a question will come up within us about, when did this happen? Which is our way of sort of pulling it down into our context. Like, did that happen before or after this other thing? And sort of we sort of narrow our view of it into that. And again, that's not an invalid way to look at time, but there may be other qualities that we would more readily notice about those other time and places if we were more open to different ways of understanding that in our context.
Okay, so I've had a couple of slips where I've gone into what feels like timelessness. And when that has happened to me, I have lost my individuality. Like, I feel like I have melded back into the source energy of everything. And I have no concept of time at that point. But then I also lose concept of being separate or being an individual in any kind of sense. And then when I get pulled back, I'm kind of like, ooh, I like being an individual, like, versus not being an individual. So like, I have like a internal grappling with, like, when I die, do I become it all? And then, like, what if I don't want to always become it all again? That, like, there's like this like in and out breath of the universe that kind of is bothering me in a bit. But do they, having a different experience of time, they still have an individuality though? Like, there still are some sort of individuals in some kind of sense that are speaking through you. So how do they, I don't know if you guys have talked about that, but how do they kind of separate the two, like time and individuality? And what do they think of oneness as a concept?
Great questions. So they've laughed at me about questions like this many times because right now, what many of us are grappling with is this question of identity. Because as we are moving through this phase of awakening where we're starting to question the hard and fast linearity of time, the thing that first comes up for us is then, wait, but who am I? And they're saying the reason is because those things have been so connected for you in your experience of limitation. You basically defined yourselves by the 5 senses manifestations that happened over a period of time that you can remember. Yeah. So they tease me and they say, if you had no childhood, if you had no other experiences to append yourself to, how would you define yourself right now in this present moment? And for a human, it's sort of like, it's almost terrifying to contemplate life or existence untethered from a history that has built into an identity. And they're sort of like, these are why you're having these questions, is because you're catching on to the fact that, like, hang on, if time's fluid, how the hell do I identify myself? What am I then? If I have a past lifetime over there and a past lifetime over here, and, and then also, like you're saying, if I merge into the one. Now, those experiences, so the chorus is very clear that your uniqueness is a fundamental part of creation. Every being in creation has what they call a unique frequency, a core frequency that is inviolable. It is your connection to all that is, to the infinite power of the infinite. Mm-hmm. And so they say that your uniqueness is required for creation to be complete. So as we expand, right, they say really what you're coming into is you're expanding more and more into your own uniqueness. You're discovering more and more of who you are. We expand just like the universe. So there's going to be more and fascinating parts of us as we go, which even clarifies more the uniqueness that we are. This is hard for a lot of us to imagine because it's sort of like, you run out of ideas for uniqueness. Is it like, I mean, we all, by their view, look a lot alike here. It's like we all have heads. And so it's like, what does an infinite universe of infinite uniqueness even look like? So when we have those experiences where we go forward, and this can be common in terms of, if you take microdose psychedelics or things like that, people describe these experiences where essentially they've stepped out of our belief systems, either softly or like a big old jump. And what they feel like they went into was like a oneness, right? And the chorus is like, that is a totally valid perspective, being a human who is coming from a group consensus that is super stringent, full of limitation, in which you disallowed your ability to connect to really anything beyond your game. And so as you step into this connection, this connective power that awaits you beyond these beliefs, they're like, we can understand how it would feel like a oneness in the first forays. It would be like, wow, I can't believe I can be so connected to everything else. I can feel these other things. I feel a oneness with the trees, right? We're sort of just blown away by this connection. And they're like, yeah, it's an aspect of the perspective that you're coming from. It's the contrast. It doesn't necessarily negate your uniqueness, but from the conscious perspective that you're moving out of the belief systems and then moving back in, you could say like, wow, there's a fuck ton of connection out there. And they're like, yeah, there is. It's amazing. And as you go forward more and more into those connective places, you will also understand or come to clarity on your uniqueness and what you contribute to that oneness even more.
I do know that every everybody has a unique sound. Like the energy that splits your atoms is, let's just like how we have a unique voice. I do know, like, in the way I've been able to basically identify whether or not, whether it's a past life, future life, like a parallel life, whatever. But the fact that I can identify that I have a fragment of that signature within me is like, there's an energetic sound like, oh yeah, that is related to me. And I can hear the sounds on everybody has like their own voice signature. So I do think even, and I will say, even when I was in experiences which were psychedelics but weren't only in psychedelics, I've had these crazy popping into things with big long deja vus, like a near death experience kind of thing, where I thought I was going to die in a plane. Like there's a lot of different things that have popped me into this, the monad, like the one seeing eye sort of feeling thing. And even within the oneness though, I was able to distinguish other. So I like that. That's really interesting how you put it that way. So okay, so let's go back down to earth for a minute and talk about, for people who, okay, I think there's a lot of fear around the word channel. I think a lot of people are like, I don't know, they have whatever ideas, let them have whatever ideas they have, but let them have, they have some ideas about it. But so how did you as a person, when you were going through this, explain how this like kind of happened to you, and how did you justify it to yourself or allow it?
I avoided it for years, quite brutally, till I couldn't anymore. So I get the fear around being a channel, because I think it would make sense that you would have some questions as to who a channel is bringing through. And, the chorus always says like, hey, fear is your perception of your own fence line. It's the barrier of your most expanded belief at that moment in time. Your sense of fear is that sense of that furthest stretch. And, some people are, afraid of channels because maybe it's just not relevant to them at that moment in time. They might come back around to it. They also may not need to. So, I think both the fear is logical, and then energetically, I think it's healthy to appreciate fear. So I had listened to a channel for years, to Esther Hicks. And it was about 5 years in that I realized, oh my God, she's channeling. That was right as my illness started to take a real bad turn for the worst. And over the next couple of years, we really struggled. Saw a lot of doctors. Some of those medications made things worse. Some of them did nothing at all. No one could
So,
really
a
understand it.
mysterious illness, right? Like you don't really know what exactly it was, like autoimmune kind of thing.
It was progressive. It kept getting worse, and every doctor, it was across systems. So in the beginning, it was a lot of like GI and hormonal systems and whatever. So, you go and you see one doctor, and the doctor's like, well, I only look at your gut. You'll have to go see somebody else for hormones. So, it was very hard to understand what was happening. But then it kept getting worse until eventually I did collapse. And I had a lot of nervous system issues. I developed a stutter. My parents had to care for me. I was, unable to be at home with my husband and my son. And it was through this process that I was essentially forced to consider things that I hadn't considered before. I come from a science and tech background, so this was like practically brutal.
Yeah.
But as happens in awakening, you come to these continual crossroads where the things that used to work for you are now insufficient. You have to try something new. And when all the doctors that we had seen, I was running out of doctors left to see, you sort of open to the idea of like, where else could I get answers? And that's sort of where I realized Esther had been a channel. And I was like, isn't that interesting? Like, I wonder if that's possible for me. I wonder if I could do that. I wonder if I could reach a perspective that could help me understand why this is happening. And it's basically what I was seeking and still continue to seek, is an understanding of it. So I did open to channeling. It took over a course of many months. And the first time they came through, there was definitely a very evident sensation. But also I freaked out and, shut it down almost as quickly as it began. And that relationship between seeking, sort of opening to that broader perspective and balancing my own terror sort of became a dance I did over the next several years. And I, in the beginning, ran a lot of experiments. I didn't know who I was connecting to. Now, 9 years later, I have a lot of evidence that, the chorus shows up again and again, so freaking loving, no matter what I am going through. It's amazing. It's a miracle to me how they can hold a perspective that somehow helps me to feel an ease with even like the harder things. But in the beginning, I didn't have that. So I, did what I think a lot of channels do. You sort of come up with your questions. You think of the best answer you can possibly think of, and then you sort of take down their answers and you see kind of which ones, blow your mind a little more. And time and again, it was theirs. Then I started to test my connection. So I used to try and channel while I was driving in the car or at the grocery store or on walks, just to see if this was a valid thing or, was only possible in certain circumstances. And they thought the whole thing was pretty entertaining. I mean, they were like, oh, we're in the car today, like, this is great. And so, now today I have a lot of trust for that. And now today I understand how I did sense it, that first connection. And I do believe everyone has an innate ability to sense these things and to connect. May not be relevant yet, or, may
So
come later,
with
but
that, is it like is it a thought voice? Like how do you experience in your physicality? Like how does it express itself in your brain to you?
it depends on which member of the chorus. Sometimes it'll come through a little differently. I would say for the most part, I receive the sense of an understanding. I receive a full sort of download, and then over time, it sort of comes out in the form of words. So it's like, imagine how you feel when you sit down with a friend and you ask them a question, and then they spend the next 5 minutes explaining it to you. And then at the end of the 5 minutes, you feel Like, oh, okay, I get that.
Yeah.
That is the sense that I often receive. It's like feels like a wholeness, like a next level of wholeness. And then I am able to translate that into words.
So it's
And
almost like it's a telepathic download that's kind of happening in a way.
from the vaster members of the chorus, I would say yes. And then I translate it into basically our frequencies. Some other members of the chorus, though, feel much more similar to human communication. It feels more specific. It feels like a particular sentence, a particular word. And I've come back to that again and again. I was like, no, they're really saying that word, and now it goes faster. It's a lot easier to be like, that's the word. And it just sort of flows. Um, and then sometimes I do receive pictures depending on what they're talking about. Sometimes it's easier for them to just be like this instead of, a particular meaningful word. So there's a lot of variety in the communication.
Now, I know with you in particular, like one of the things I wanted to get to was the trees called you out one time and you got introduced to the tree kingdom or whatever you want to call it. And like how they are beings in and of themselves as well. And so tell me about not, so the chorus is sort of with you always, but then you have like right now I know you're also kind of having some communications with water beings because you've moved to the ocean. So but these water beings and or like these tree beings are something that it's almost like you can communicate with, but they're not something that is with you always that you're channeling always. So how do you distinguish that?
Um, so the tree kingdom, some of these beings I have been, you could say, introduced to by the chorus. So the chorus is sort of like way out there off the game. And then they were sort of like, and now that you're continuing to open, you'll more easily be able to communicate with some of the more energetic members that are also on the periphery of the game or in the game, depending on how you define it. Many ways to define it. So I did not know I was going to be connecting with the trees the day I went hiking. Story we tell in the podcast. But then it made a lot of sense once we did, because I could feel their energy. I knew they were sort of in the mountains on this trail or what have you. And when they came through, it definitely feels like a very different voice. They have a different perspective on this. They have been aware of humanity for a very long time. Like the mountains too, the mountains have also been aware of humanity for a very long time. In some ways, you could say that they experience time differently than we do. And so they have not experienced a passage in the same way or a forgetting. They are aware humanity sort of forgot these connections or moved away from these connections, and they remember the times when we still had them. And so you could say, by way of their energetic connections, hold vast memories. Or you could also say, if you use the time, place, understanding, they're simply still connected to the times when we were able still to connect with them. But they both, in my experience, at least the forests in the Rocky Mountains, understand in some ways our choice of limitation, have learned a lot by our choice to experience this, and are very excited to reconnect with humanity at broad scale. Because even though they have been able to observe us in many ways, when we are able to energetically reconnect with them, we convey the rest of the picture. Like when we cut off our energetic connections from some of these other kingdoms or kinds or whatever you want to say, they couldn't hear from us either. The chorus is broader. So the chorus is like, we see you from the moment you chose to, incarnate in this whole thing called a belief system. So they did in some ways experience a separation, but it's very light. It's very fine. Whereas those members of our reality, of our game, who are a little more physical, that we can even see on the wavelengths of visible light, did experience a little bit more of a disconnection from us. So they're like, you're back, like we still remember, we still access those frequencies when you could connect to us, but also we're pretty stoked to hear what you all will convey to us about your experience of limitation when you all begin to connect again.
Okay, so then let's go into when we were connected, because I think that that's like, what? I feel like it's like secret amazing knowledge. Okay, so okay, in your podcast you talk about this, and then you talked about how you think the Spanish peaks in Colorado may have been, and we talked about this a little bit. So I don't know how much you want to go into it or not, but there's been kind of an understanding that the humans that were, or maybe will be once again, um, did something. We're unclear about what, because you're also from a perspective of things that didn't care about us, or not didn't care about us, but they didn't have the intricate knowledge, maybe, that, like, if the mountains or the trees, like if we created a nuclear bomb right now, they would be like, yeah, you guys blew something up, you do, but I don't know that they would know how we actually did it, kind of thing. Like, I don't know if I'm explaining that right, but anyway, you say that there was some sort of cataclysm or something that ended in an old epoch, and that they are aware of that, and that we have been remembering or reassembling since then or something. So and tell me, like, how you think like the Spanish peaks may be involved in this and stuff.
Mhm. Okay, so I
I'm a
guess
horrible question asker, and I'm sorry, but
I totally get it. I am on the same wavelength, man. Yes. Okay. So before we get into these eras of history, it's important to note that the way the chorus understands our current physical bodies is what they call a mind-body instrument. They don't see a difference between the mind and the physical body. They see these things as very intricately connected. We are a unified field of perception, according to them. So our humanoid form, as you could say, is an expression of the current beliefs that we hold. When they talk about history, they are reaching back into very, very, by a linear definition, ancient history, where we may not have looked like we do today, but energetically, we were very similar. There was slight variations in our beliefs, but there was a trajectory almost that continued us here. So I don't know what we looked like back then, honestly. I have memories, sporadic, that have come through as I've done this work with the chorus, where I remember being there, but the context feels very different. My expression of my physical self expression feels very different. So one of the first memories prior to La Garita Caldera that I recalled was an experience of great destruction. And I know that now this is, relatively commonplace, of like, oh, we keep destroying things. This idea is coming up. This destruction, however, is way, way, way far back. And depending on how you want to define the kickoff point for our limitation, this event could be viewed as one of it. Because in that experience, we created the concept of destruction. If you compare it to the infinite place from which we came, where everything grows back, everything's constantly infinite, you can't actually lose stuff, right? This infinite, ever sustainable, ever loving place.
like no
To
entropy.
have an experience where something can be destroyed, meaning it can't grow back, it is lost, you may not know how to fix it, you may never get it back again, is almost like a boom, kickoff point of finiteness. It is, to be finite would be to destroy without being able to get it back again, or to go anywhere you want to go anymore. So this was one of my first memories to come through, and they're sort of like, this is where it all began in some ways, depending on how you want to look at it. And by my understanding, a lot of time passed, a lot of eras, a lot of other things. And so we're fast forwarding through a lot of experiences of limitation in which we continue to develop these beliefs before we arrive at what we might call Earth, depending on how you define Earth or planets or these structures. And essentially, our experience of destruction had continued to energize our experience of this game, because by way of experiencing something in manifested form here, we build a belief. And so we embodied the idea that we could destroy things. So by the time we arrived to Earth, we have not only had many experiences of destruction, because we embody that, we express that possibility. But also, we had come across something that we would call today remorse, meaning we didn't really mean to do it. And so there was sort of an expression in us of like, not only do we destroy, but sometimes we destroy when we didn't mean to. This, as you can understand, is an accelerated version of limitation, because now there's even not just the universe that you have cut off your connections to, but now you're cutting off connections to parts of yourself, perceptions that you have, abilities that you have that you now no longer trust, because you can't anticipate when something you do with those abilities could lead to destruction. So when we arrived here, however you want to define arriving and however you want to define here, this was sort of after another great cataclysm. And we essentially decided that the safest way to deal with this inability to control or predict even our own destructive potential was to forget. By way of forgetting, by way of disconnecting ourselves from those other time places, as you know, we would call it today a forgetting, we wouldn't remember how to do these things. We wouldn't remember who we were. We basically enforced an amnesia upon our own selves as a way of putting us in jail. And what more effective jail than forgetting what you even are? It's like a full and total disconnection. The remnants of that choice, I am told, are what is demonstrated in the US Southwest, particularly around the area of La Garita caldera. And, you know, geologists, I've looked this up, I didn't even know about it before I had all these experiences. And we talk about all of this more in season 2 of the podcast, in case someone who's listening is interested in this. But essentially, the remnants of what's there at La Garita caldera is, as far as we can tell, the largest volcanic eruption that has ever taken place on planet Earth, but by way of the physical evidence that's remained. So I don't know what kind of cataclysm was sort of the reflection of a choice to forget, or how that all transpired. But essentially what happened there has then led to, you know, sort of where we are today, where we are starting to realize that there is a lot that we don't remember.
Yeah. And I think a lot of us are trying to remember ourselves. Like we're like first there's that's really interesting to see about the, like, that's what I think the awakening is more than anything. Like, if you, whatever you want to call awakening it. But I just noticed, like, I don't think my grandparents gave, you know, 2 flips about anything we're talking. They would be like, all right, well, give me that channel changer. You go down outside. Like there's no, there would have been, there would have been no way they would have even remotely cared about. Like, I do feel like as we're progressing, maybe in every generation, or maybe it's this era, maybe it's this time frame, I don't know. Like, people are starting to go like starting to try to find puzzle pieces, which is something that wasn't even in the consciousness for a long time.
Right.
So, yeah, okay. So let's talk about the crystalline structure things, because I think that's kind of cool.
Me too.
Yeah. Okay, so tell us, like, vaguely about what you remember about that kind of situation.
Sure. So I less of this is in my memory, and more of this is coming through present day understanding and work that I've been doing with the course. I wish I could remember more about this era and how we did this, and so maybe that's coming, because they say desire is directional. It's the simply the direction in which you're heading. But okay, so continuing with the line of history, if we'd like to put it on a line, and presently we love to put things on lines, so we're going to roll with that. We're going to accept that part of ourselves. Okay, so they said that, and this is a big part of book 2. So if you're interested in these topics, the chorus, the books are predominantly channeled, and this is, their description of things in book 2 is what I am taking right now and sharing.
Oh, but
Says
one real quick on that note, you are a cumulative thing. Like it is best to start from the beginning and then go forward. It really helps you like you're like a giant novel that unfolds as it goes forward. Whereas mine is everything I put out is just kind of like you could pick and choose, blah 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 blah. Yours is like it's not a choose your own adventure. You start from the beginning. It's really good.
Thanks. Yes, and I do think it helps because in the second book in particular, they are assuming a knowledge of the concepts that they laid out in the first podcast season and in the first book. So the second book, there's like a transition first 2 or 3 chapters as they continue like a sort of like smoothing over of like, these are the definitions, right? You got this. And then they pick up the pace. And book 2 is like way more flowing, a lot more happening. So it does help to go in order just to sort of start to understand the way the course looks at things. So then by the time you get to the description that I'm about to give you, more of it can resonate in a way that's like, oh, I see how that connects, 12 different pieces that they've been laying out. So suffice it to say, that's okay. We can jump forward. And then I think if it speaks to you, then, maybe go check out their other material. But okay, so first starting with the definition of Earth. So it's very interesting right now that there is some debate about what we even feel like our home planet, if you like that word, is. And they start describing their history. It's sort of like Earth was at one point an idea, it was a concept, it was a belief. So of other frequencies, of more etheric frequencies, if you like that word. And then at some point, the mountains were grown. So by their view and by the mountains agreement, they are a consciousness, but also there was a partnership at play between us and the consciousnesses of the mountains to sort of create these structures. By their own description, there's much more to the mountains than rocks. They're a very vast consciousness. There's a lot going on there, but the aspect of it that we have been able to see is like piles of rock, really big piles of rock. And that's, about it. But now, as I'm sure, many who are feeling there's sort of like a magic in the mountains, a majesty in the mountains. People want to have retreats there. Like we're starting to catch on that there's like a lot more going on in those environments. And that's true. When we partnered with the mountains to create these structures, it was essentially harnessing an energy that existed in the earth plane, in the earth as a planet. Again, whatever word you want to use is fine. There are many perspectives on these things in the universe. So the structures of the mountains sort of harness the energy upward to the apex, to the pinnacles of those things. And we existed essentially up there. We were less constrained by physical needs then that we are today. We didn't feel heat and cold or need food in the same way then. The energy that was sort of channeled upwards at those apexes were pretty much enough to sustain us. And we really dug what it was up there. So over many eras, over many, many epics, many stories that, eventually will come out as we all remember these things. Ultimately, we were sort of drawn down the mountain, sort of by interest or however you want to say it. As some of that unfolded, there was another cataclysm in which the mountains were flattened. They were destroyed. And the energetic bridges that they represented were therefore also destroyed. Unable to reach those sort of vaulted elevations any longer, we tried to recreate them now sort of more on the earth plane. However, as was happening in our continued descent into limitation, again, if you like a linear aspect, we were descending into limitation, we could not connect to the consciousness of the mountains any longer. And we had been so busy with our dramas that we didn't quite recognize that until it was too late.
So AKA the pyramids kind of thing. Like that's like a recreation attempt.
So yes, by the chorus's own view and by some things that I have been exposed to, I guess you could say, pyramids are essentially a more primitive version of mountains.
Mhm.
So when we created those structures, we couldn't actually grow mountains any longer. We couldn't communicate with that consciousness in that way, but we still had an ability to work with stone to sort of sing to it in a way. So it's like repeating recipes without even knowing how to grow food or where it comes from. It was a partial knowledge, but we used it to the best that we could to build sort of these earthly temples and recreate the harnessing of this energy from the earth itself. So pyramid-like structures are replicas of basically the organic structures of the mountains.
So what about so it very much is like a Mount Olympus kind of thing to me, like we were the gods living up in the mountains, and then, um so are there still, well, I remember you talking about how like there may have been like almost like crystalline structure, almost like the idea of cities in the clouds kind of thing. Like we may have like lived in crystalline structures above the cloud. Um do you think that there is a dimension and or a subsection of our consciousnesses that still exists there?
So that's a great question. So to explain the crystalline structures, so essentially the earthbound temples that tried to replicate the structure of the mountains weren't enough to step up our energy, step up our frequencies. So it became sort of a build a pyramid, and then there were crystalline structures that sort of were above that. My understanding is that many of them were sort of appended to the energy of the earth, which moves. They were organic in that sort of nature. So if you want to call them ships flying around, that works. If you want to call them structures, that works. Basically these were massive things that floated above these structures and sort of moved around. My understanding is that depending on how you want to look at it, you could say that a part of our consciousness is still there. You could also fairly say that like our consciousness came down here. And as we return to those frequencies or being able to perceive them, that then we are expanding or re-expanding to those places. And, some people call this dimensions. I guess it depends on your definition of dimension. According to the chorus, the physical dimension for them is defined by all belief holders. You are still physical if you hold a belief, any belief. And that could be a godlike entity that lives for 80,000 years. But if he has a belief in dying and he dies at 80,000 years of old, well, he's got a belief. So he's technically in our game.
Right.
So you could say that those other frequencies are simply other frequencies within the game. They have a very different quality or a very different expression than what we are here, or you could call it another dimension. But there is an overlap of sorts by way of our physical perspective. If you went up to the top of a mountain, is it valid that you could just see a top of a mountain? Totally, because that is resonance with our frequencies here. If you went to the top of a mountain and you saw gates to a totally different world, is that a valid perspective? Yeah, sure is. Because there's a lot that still exists on these other frequencies that by our agreement to participate here, we agreed not to perceive until now.
Yeah, we agreed not to perceive. Okay, that's interesting. Huh. Okay, and so why is it coming back?
I mean, loosely awakening. I mean, it was always our choice to pass through these experiences. I mean, by the chorus's view, like we were always assured to awaken. Like expansion is an inherent aspect of creation. So they're like, when you chose to be limited, you always knew it would last the exact amount of time that it needed to, that you would benefit from it in like all the ways that would be so perfect for everything you would ever hope to achieve and then some.
Mhm.
So they're sort of like, and here you are. Like, you're coming back to us. You can already hear us. You're asking these questions. You're seeing these things. You're taking a second look at pyramids. You're, wondering about history. Like, to them, it's like the party is already underway. Now, from our perspective, I mean, I have days where I'm like, I don't fucking know anything. It's
Yeah.
just like hit these walls where you're like, you're starting to get it. And then all of a sudden you're just like, I know nothing. Right. So we're still coming out of our human experience of these things, but then we're snapping back more and more. We're oscillating more and more to these broader places where we do have a moment of like, holy shit, I never thought of it that way, or I remember that, or, these are all examples of our awakening.
Even the fact that you and I are having this conversation couldn't have happened 20 years ago. I didn't know anybody having this conversation 20 years ago. Like, or like when I was in college, like if I don't know if it's just we now have the means with the internet to find each other's, or if it's just socially more acceptable to like be your individual self, whereas it used to not be. Like, it's not 100% yet, but it's becoming more so. So there's something in that as well.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
The idea of protection, like you did it at the first episode 20. Okay, let me see. It's so funny your description of the course on protection and that basically, I used to say this thing all the time, like love, light, protection, and healing, but it's kind of like protection is a way to, in some ways, not expand. It's a way to keep yourself isolated. And I thought that was such a just wow, the way that they kind of went into that. So how often do you go back to that concept?
It's a great question. So for those who are not familiar, I'll briefly describe their view of protection. So there are a variety of flavors of finiteness in this game, but essentially, if somebody is experiencing finiteness in any way, they're in the game. So you could have finiteness, but feel like you're always, perfectly in control. But you could also have an experience of not in control, which is what we love to do all day, every day. Then you could also have further limiting beliefs on top of that, which is what humanity has done, which might include prevention and protection. So the reason why they consider these to be limiting is because by way of our belief in the need to prevent things from happening and to protect ourselves from things, what we are essentially reinforcing is the idea that we are finite and insufficient. If we were all godlike and if we were incredibly powerful and if we trusted ourselves in any situation, it would probably never occur to us to prevent something, right? We would just show up and smash it with a hammer. So when humans are constantly energizing, put on your seatbelt. What we are energizing is the idea that we're frail and that if a car accident happens, we could be damaged, right? We're energizing the entire construct in our version of the game, and we do it for each other all the time. And the reason why I say for each other is because this is a group consensus. So we participate in here as a group. So when I have an experience of loss of control and something terrible that happened to me, and you hear about it, almost subconsciously, you will activate beliefs of like, oh, I got to protect myself from that. I got to prevent that from happening. Have you ever heard someone tell you like a really awful story and then you go home and you like do something like even subconsciously related to that? Like they got a spider bite, like, and then you kind of go home and you look around for spiders or whatever it is. That is no one's fault. And it's also completely our fault because we chose a group consensus. So the protection idea to them is, again, nothing to fight against. With all of these beliefs, the way you navigate them in awakening is simply by seeing them. The light of consciousness, we always talk about that. By bringing these beliefs to consciousness, what we are given then is a new choice. We're not unconsciously driven by them in the same way anymore. And you can almost see it happen with some people where they come into contact with an idea and then they almost get like, there's like a prevention or a protection launch inside of them. Now, do they consciously in that moment have a perspective of like, oh shit, look at this. I'm a human and I'm feeling like I need to protect myself? No, they're still unconscious in the experience of the belief itself, which is where we all have been and where we are all coming from. So by the chorus's view, the fact that we can even read a book that has in there a different idea about these things called prevention and protection is already like reason for celebration, because they're like, you see it now and you will feel it more consciously in different ways. As you go into a situation, you will be more aware as something comes up. Now, does that mean I don't protect myself anymore? Fuck no. Like, I'm still in the game. I still put on sunscreen. I still buckle my seatbelt, right? I have a respect and an understanding for what we created here. Sometimes I choose not to energize that. Sometimes I still participate. It is an oscillation currently in this phase of awakening where we're going to be both for a period of time, and that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, for me, like when I heard that, like I just kept on it, like I really think it reinforced my like like you the less fear we have, it's just like it's just so much more expansive. Fear is a contracting emotion, and like it's I think it's valid. It happens. It's gonna happen. It's still gonna happen. Whether you want to try to get out of it or not, it's still gonna happen. But I think trying to protect yourself from fear and for like it's you're lingering on something that's going to happen. You can I think you can grow through things more. You can expedite the process of what it is we're doing here if you just kind of embrace the fact that things are going to happen, and that's how we grow.
Yeah.
Which is so yeah, I really just love the courses, like the thing about protection. And then okay, one second, let me read my notes. I say, okay, your take on depression really hit me. I hadn't dealt with it to that level, but I do see the inner working of how that manifests, and it just expanded my understanding of this emotion so much more for that, and I will always be forever grateful for you on that. Like the way you had a depression episode that came through, and the way you walked us through it, I think is super healthy for anybody maybe going through that, or that will go through that, or you just have such a human but also a macro step and look at that. So I guess, do you have any advice for depression people? Or
I mean,
not depression people, but somebody who's going through a spell of depression. You're a depression people. No, I don't mean
I
like
am a card carrying depression person, like have been there, understand it, experience it still. And I'll explain, why I think I experience it still. So in the first season of the podcast and the first book, the course spends a lot of time on different emotions that a lot of us are feeling now and their perspective on energetically, how those come to be. Depression, by their view, is what they call an energetic eddy. So some aspect of you that is expanding, that is awakening, senses this sort of more expansive, new energy kind of place. And then the five senses part of you, or part of us, is like, that ain't here yet. I don't know what to do about any of this. And I can't put together enough physical manifestations to make this make sense. And it's sort of like a sinking feeling, like an overwhelmed feeling, where there is a sense of loss of direction. Like, what do I even do? And you're not sure which one to give up. You don't want to give up sort of that hope for the future, even just a feeling sense, right? This may not be a conscious, like, oh, it's this thing I'm hoping for. It's a very awakening process, expansion in your energetic perception that is happening. And then there's this other part of you that's making really valid points, like, it's not here. You don't see it. It's not on the five senses yet. And that weight, that eddy feels to us is what we call depression. So in the season 1 episode on depression, I, give a story of my experience of it. And it was when I really finally started to come to an understanding of it, because I was finally acknowledging that the things I was perceiving energetically were real in a way that I couldn't yet validate on the five senses. These are things that we're feeling, and they are different than the five senses. And sometimes they don't connect yet. And getting to a peace about sort of holding open the door for each one softens the sensations of depression, because it sort of relaxes us out of the energetic eddy, where both can be true. It's true it's not here yet. It's true that you're sensing something big or real, or a hope maybe that you can even identify. Oftentimes human experiences throw us into depression by way of this. So perhaps we have a loss, perhaps we lose a loved one to death. And yet there's some part of us that wants to still know that they're still out there, or they're still connected. You can still connect to them, or they're okay, right? And then there's no five senses support for that yet. They're both true. And the more we expand, the more those things that you desire, which are directional, that's the direction you're heading, will start to come through. But in these interim periods, the trick or the challenge is to remain open to the validity of both things, and not try to pick sort of a winning side. I have found that as I've gone forward in awakening, I still hit these moments of depression where I feel the energetic eddies. I'm really accelerating through things, and I'm feeling new things and getting more communications from beings. And then my five senses is like, how is this all going to work out? We don't see it. Like, there's no money for that. You don't have time for that, right? And I start to feel that sense of like, ugh, just pulls you down. And I have found that I don't fight it in the way that I used to. It's sort of like, oh, okay, here it is. Like, we're going to pass through this now. I let it
You
be.
feel like you've developed the tools to move through it quicker.
To allow for it smoother, maybe, is a way to say it. And yes, that results in moving through it more quickly. But I'm less afraid of it than I used to be. I fight it less than I used to. I move through it faster than I ever did. And I also understand what it's telling me. I acknowledge that it's a representation of the fact that, like, we are all expanding, and we're finding these things that we wish for or feel is missing, or, these sensations that are sometimes difficult to describe. And then also, we're coming from a reality that was true. We built it. We had to do stuff and figure shit out and work hard and make it happen. So I think the more you go into and out of depressive episodes, the more you recognize its purpose. And the Course says that too. It's like, really, all of these things in awakening ultimately are serving you. They're awakening us to the beliefs we held that told us those things weren't possible, or how could you, or whatever. And sometimes when we are in a depressive episode where we feel very numb and very lost, there are actually many energetic things happening. This is a very new concept for humans, but depression is actually very productive. From an energetic awakening type of perspective, there is a lot that we get done while we are depressed.
I love that. And I think that that's going to be very helpful for people. And you should teach a class on depression. Just saying. Now, that's a way to monetize through that. But right. Anyway, I can't let you go before we talk a little bit about nubs and hallmarks, because that is like, so, okay, Katie and I with Andrew Fink have been working on this. I guess, should we just, like, we've been working on categorizing, how do we start this?
Database.
It's a database, but like, so what we've been doing is looking at all the anomaly figures, compiling all the anomalous stuff of megalithic sites, right? Or these old like sites that don't really quite make sense. Things that have these nubs, which if you watch my channel, then you probably know what a nub is, because I've had about like 30 episodes on them. But anyway, they're protrusions that come from random old ruined stones, right? That you're like, what is that? And everybody has their own theories, and none of them match up to everything. Or like the giant stones or whatever. So there's I don't know how many we are categorizing right now, like probably like 15 or so. But there's nubs, there's pinch holes, there's mortalists, there's all this stuff. So how did that grab you? How did I guess we'll just call them the hallmarks, the hallmarks of the ancient past. That's like not really 100% explainable. How did you come to it? And what do you think about it?
So, I think it's freaking awesome. I think most people will resonate with this. So the nubs crossed my radar. Maybe some megalithic hallmark crosses your radar. And you sort of have this feeling of like, yeah, what is that? And then you sort of like get into these circles and there's all this discussion happening and people finding things and whatever. And what I found next was like, I liked listening to your channel. I liked listening to you explore these things. Like I liked the video, the interview that you did with Andrew and then with others. And so there's sort of like a sense of like, yeah, like what is this? And I know other people have felt it too, right? You read a Graham Hancock book or you read something and it draws you into a feeling like, I want to be on the team. I want to help figure this out too. And I think and hope that that sensation is spreading because it would be a reflection of the fact that we're starting to remember these things. We're going to start to piece them back together. And as the Course said, and I wholeheartedly agree, we each have pieces of this puzzle. We're going to need everybody. We're going to need everybody to put this back together. So I think that the hallmarks, I think currently we have like 21 in the database, are a fantastic start to what we are beginning to see on visual wavelengths. I think also what we'll start to come into is things that people are going to feel. They're going to sense things that they just know about certain sites. And if they can just continue to follow what it is that they sense, I think more of those mysteries will be unlocked, maybe in ways that nobody else can understand except for that person. But ultimately, if we all keep moving forward on our paths, then I think the discoveries that we'll start to share with each other will really start to accelerate.
I couldn't agree more with that. And I feel like the more eyes on this project, the more like, I mean, so there's not that many people who are looking at it relatively, like, and I even find within my own self, like if the more sites I look at, the more I start seeing different correlations that I didn't see before. And then I'll be like, wait, have we noticed this? Like, what is this thing?
Yeah.
What is this cool? Like, what are we calling this? Let's call this something.
Like Germany last night, I was like, there it is.
Like, why is everything on melty stone? Like, what? Yeah, like, what is this melty stone stuff? Like, why?
Yes.
Like, and what? Like, naming the stuff, like trying to figure out, like, okay, is this part of the destruction of this thing, or is this part of the creation of this thing? Like, trying to figure, and that's a whole. But then that goes into timeline stuff too, right? Because we are told by mainstream academia that this begot this, begot this, begot this, and this was from this culture and this culture and this culture, and you're like, but how come they're all using? It's like, this is how I describe it to some of my Muggle friends. I'll say, like, right now, there's probably different building styles in Japan than there is in Texas, than there is in whatever, Germany or South Africa. Okay, maybe whatever. Yep. But we all use screws. We all use steel. We all use like plywood and wood and sheetrock in our buildings. That's just kind of like part of our globalized world right now. We use some of the same materials. Well, that's cool, but like if you were saying Peru was like from 1,000 years ago, and then like the pyramid stuff's like 5,000-6,000 years ago. Okay, well, how come they both have these ugly asymmetrical protrusions randomly sticking from their stones? You know, how come they're using the same building techniques? How come they're using some of the same materials? Like, riddle me that in your little timeline of that begat that, begat that. Yeah, which all can't verifiably even be dated correctly because it's stone, and stone can't be dated. So I just feel like when I explain it to people like that, they're like, oh, and then they don't want to know. They're like, oh.
Been there. I mean, it was on the other side of my fence line at one point too, where I was like, I just, you sort of just shrug away from that topic, even if you have a reason. I mean, that's okay. I've been there, but doesn't it make sense that the line felt like it explained everything to us all for a period of time? And then now there are people stepping off the line that are like, we found this, and then we found this, and then we found this. and that are saying the line's not working the
Yeah.
way it used to. Now, eventually, as we expand through all this and we discover all these things and maybe put some back together, would we be able to reach a perspective where we could then also explain it by way of the valid perspective of a line? Totally. But in the in-between phase, I think it will be helpful for many of us to maybe give up the line for a little bit. Just move forward with what you feel inspired about a certain site, or where to look next, or what to pin together. And maybe, like the moving off the line is where the muggles, as you say, might start as like, you're pointing out like the line's not working. And then they're like, that brings up a whole other barrel of monkeys.
yeah.
Like, I am not ready to question the linear time aspects. Okay, it gets them off of it. But then once you're off of it,
You become way
maybe,
more open to things. You're like,
yeah, maybe these are all simultaneously existent. Maybe we're seeing evidence of other places we're going to start to reach. Maybe it didn't all have to be one after the other. Maybe it's still all happening right now. I mean, there are so many ways to look at it. And when you, like you said earlier in the episode, like when you start to feel a broader identity of yourself that expands beyond a linear definition of time, when you're like, I'm still me and I'm still crushing it. Now I'm looking at nubs. Now I'm looking at other stuff and what have you. It feels a lot more fun and freeing to expand into sort of an exploration that doesn't necessarily need a line. We don't invalidate it. Like, we get it. We lived in the line perspective too. And now we're starting to build together other ways of understanding it.
I also have had like an internal struggle with I feel like I've moved past it for the most part, but like I used to want to like have to be like, yeah, but the line sucks, y'all. The line sucks, and then like getting called crazy all the time. Like I got back from Egypt 3 years ago, and I was telling my older brother about how much of a mystery it is, like really, like how we don't know. And he was just like, are you talking about? I just watched a PBS special about how they made the pyramids. It's like slaves and like some boats.
Cut and dry.
Like, yeah, like you're talking nonsense. This is craziness. You're talking craziness. And it was just like cut you down. That's it. Nothing. Don't talk to me about this craziness anymore. Like, I don't know what you're on about with all that blah blah, but no. That's no, like a hardcore. It was like a wall. He just put like a big wall there. Like, hey, I'm not getting involved in your whatever this crazy is. And I was so kind of like I just kind of love him for it. I'm just like, whatever, like that's fine. And maybe one day it probably won't come through me, but maybe it'll come through maybe one day he'll kind of be like, oh, that is kind of weird. That doesn't make sense. Maybe he won't. And both ways are fine. Maybe he dies being like, yeah, no, everything is as I think it is, and that is it. Yep. And if that's what happens, if some people don't ever expand their understanding of what we're going, if some people don't ever broaden their horizons, that's actually okay as well. And that's like part of the game too. So it's been kind of a challenge for me to try to be okay with them not being okay with me, and with that just being how, like, that's cool. That's how we go.
Yeah, I totally resonate with that. I've had a similar path. And I think, at first we think we have to invalidate the old thing in order to accept the new thing, because that's what we did for a long time in the experience of limitation. Like, there was only room for one. A lot of being on the line has to do with one at a time, one way to see things, singularity of an experience is what they say we're in here. Mm-hmm. So, you had to sort of like jettison the old in order to make room for the new. And really what that energized was the experience of needing to invalidate again and again and again, which again collapses. We can't see multiple perspectives. We can't see multiple ways of experiencing it, because we have to just invalidate. And so we only have one. And I think as we go forward, a lot of us are feeling a lightness of like, whatever, that can exist too, because we are expanding into different definitions of it, different explanations of it. In fact, multiple perspectives on the same thing can all be equally valid at the same time. And you'll often come to a clearer understanding of the thing you're all looking at by way of all sharing, the different perspectives. To a point where logically we get that. And we're now as a species moving into a place where we're going to start to feel it too. Because sometimes I think we all are like, yeah, I get that. And then like 10 minutes later on Twitter, we're like, that's fucking bullshit, right? Okay, so we're getting it here. And eventually it's going to seep down into how we embody this in the world and how we communicate and live it with each other.
I love that. All right, so to wrap this up, like let's talk about how people can find you and what you plan on doing with the course in the future here.
Thanks, Nikki. So our website is katieandthecourse.com. Our podcast is Our Next Existence. We're on all major platforms. Season 2 is just about to wrap up. The book is also listed on the website, but it's the Book of Human Awakening, and it's available on Amazon and other providers. And then hopefully book 2 will be out here in the next couple months. And then beyond that, guess it's as good as mine. It's always a new day over here with the course. So, but you can reach out to us through the site and we're always happy to chat.
That's wonderful. Okay. And is there anything else that I didn't really, I mean, I have more notes. There's more, we will have another podcast together because I love you so much. You're so like, you're just so fresh and you're so able to like, you're just such a macro thinker. And I love that. Like, I love macro thinkers. So tell me, is there anything else that maybe we didn't hit on that you kind of maybe wanted to this time?
Well, it's a pleasure to be with another macro thinker. I enjoy all of your interviews so much. And as far as anything, no, I don't think there's missing anything today, but I would love to be back. Maybe, if your viewers are interested in meeting the course, we could do that maybe in the next session. But no, I think this was terrific. I appreciate you having me on. Thank you.
Okay, that sounds awesome. I never even thought about bringing because like I didn't realize you can kind of channel quickly. You don't have, it's not like give me an hour. I'll have to meditate for an hour and then I could talk. So no. That's really interesting. Yeah, we'll have to like go into the nuances of that for people at some point, like how they can awaken their inner channel kind of thing and stuff. But okay, so yes, I'll put all the information up. So Katie, this has been wonderful. I will see you again really soon.
Sounds great. Thank you. Bye.